Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 10 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Austin Freeman's Tolkien Dogmatics, Theology Through Mythology with the maker of Middle-earth. This time we're looking at Chapter 9, Christ in Salvation. I think I read the right chapter for this week, hopefully. Let me double check with you. This is the right chapter, of course.
That is the chapter I'm proceeding with.
There we go. Fantastic.
Did you reread it? Because
yes, I reread it last night, so it's still fresh in my mind. It's a very good chapter. I really liked it. I liked the discussion in this one, so I hope it's interesting for all of our hundreds and hundreds of listeners that will be tuning in for this episode.
I'm sure they're all surprised by you liking this.
It never happens. I always dislike every chapter.
Okay, so let's get started. Christ and salvation. I don't know where to start. I don't know. I'm kind of distracted today. I mean, I've read this and I thought it was interesting, but I'm kind of unfocused. Anywho, so the first topic, or I mean, just to talk about, the introduction is, Christ's beneficent and powerful kingship, and basically this kind of Christ themes and salvation themes in Tolkien's writings, and what Tolkien thinks about it is really the theme of this chapter. So the first topic is Christology, which is a term I've never heard before. Have you ever heard the term before?
I've never heard that term before, no.
So that was new to me. I did not look it up. I just took his word for it, the author's word for it, that word exists. Which I guess is just a study of Christ and Christ figures and Christ theology, I guess.
I would assume so, yeah, just study of Christ.
Yeah, you'd think that, but I never even heard of that. Anyway,
like angelology and demonology and stuff like that.
I've never heard of the word angelology. I guess I've heard of demonology.
Yes, well, that sort of stuff. Study of Christ, study of angels, study of demons, I believe. Anyway.
I think you just made that up. All right, so Tolkien absolutely rejects any implication that Christ appears in Middle-earth at all. That should have ended this chapter, right?
No.
Because there's all sorts of theories about the themes of Christ and the resurrection and salvation in Tolkien's writings, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But Tolkien specifically says, nope, that is not what he's trying to do. And I think this chapter goes in a lot of details about things that are common between Tolkien's writings and the story of Christ. I think it's more, in my opinion, a matter of effective storytelling, and then that he's trying to, when he's writing it, that he had a purpose to say, "Oh, this is a Christ figure." Don't you think? I mean, isn't that the bottom line?
I mean, I would say so. I don't think he was intentionally like making any one character, okay, this is Christ. I think really what Austin Freeman's getting at in this chapter is what can we get from Tolkien's writings that sort of like illuminate his own ideas about Christ and about the incarnation, and about salvation and stuff like that. Like, I don't think he's just, kind of randomly drawing parallels and stuff. I think he does have a good idea in mind, in that we can look at his writings and figure out what did Tolkien actually believe about Jesus and how is it represented in his works. But yeah, no one character is Jesus Christ in Tolkien's writings. I agree with that.
I have to say that I think it's a little unfair to Tolkien, now that he's gone, that we're trying, it's obviously a fictional world. Tolkien said emphatically that none of these characters are supposed to be a Christ figure. Also said, it seems repeatedly, that this is set in Middle-earth in a period of time that even in the fictional world would have been a pre-Christian world.
Yes.
And so and he said that God is, he could not and would not write a story about Jesus Christ because God is so infinitely greater than him, and he would not be able to do it justice. And so I just have that bone to pick with this entire discussion. But having given that kind of disclaimer, I think there are themes that are similar to Christ themes, and I just think it's more, like I said, it's like effective storytelling. Because the story of Christ is, as we've talked about in a previous season, like certain common themes in mythology and in religious theories, about going out in the wilderness and that kind of stuff. And so I think there's a lot of that going on in here. And if you have any sort of story about good and bad and redemption and self-sacrifice and have spiritual elements to a fictional story, you're going to have a lot of this stuff, right?
I mean, I agree, but I do agree that Tolkien didn't, intentionally make any one, character Christ. But he does say, and Austin Freeman mentions this, when in that letter that was written to him, you can see like the three figures, the three like roles of Christ, like through Frodo, Gandalf, and Aragorn. And Tolkien says, yes, no, I agree. You're entirely right about that. You can see that there. So I don't think it's entirely like out of the realm of, what Tolkien would have wanted to sort of find these things in here, because Tolkien did respond, positively to that. He's like, I didn't do that intentionally. But yeah, if you find that in there, go ahead and talk about it. Go ahead and find that in there.
Right. And that's my exact point, is that Tolkien never intended any of that. But
well, sure.
But if somebody points out, hey, this theme is kind of similar to the theme in the Bible. Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's very similar. I mean, that's really what Tolkien's saying.
Yeah.
So anywho, and so I think that's really what this discussion is.
I see.
You disagree, I think. Anyway,
okay.
So let's moving on. So we're going to talk about the incarnation first. Incarnation, which I guess you're talking about, incarnation of God, and that, and again, Tolkien would never take it upon himself to write a fictional account of the creation of God in and of itself. However, he does have a creation story in this mythology, and again, there's a discussion about the author placing himself in the story, which is in a sense, a way to look at Jesus, Son of God, and then now is in that story of humanity, and that kind of thing. So I don't know what you want to discuss with regard to this, but that Christ is God. The author of the story, who also enters into his own tale, as the author mentions, without diminishment or alteration, to write not an imagined tale, but a real history of redemption. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think
God being omnipotent, and then wanting this story to come about, and that kind of stuff.
I mean, I think the big point of discussion here is like the work that Freeman is referencing here. He says Tolkien states that if the author writes himself into the story as a character, the character is always only a lesser and partial picture of the real author. And so Tolkien's sort of like grappling with this idea of, how do you enter yourself into your own story without becoming lesser? Because of course, Jesus is not less than God. He is still God, and he's fully God and fully man, according to, Catholic teaching. And so really the question that Tolkien's trying to figure out is, how do I, reconcile this idea of, entering the story with the idea that, you still are the full author? Like, how are you both inside of the work and outside of the work at the same time? And that's sort of like the mystery of the incarnation that Tolkien's looking at here, is because, Jesus is physically within the created world, but he's also God, who is outside of the created world, entirely. He sees beyond space and time and stuff like that. So it's this interesting sort of idea of, how do you combine the two? And I don't think Tolkien ever really finds an answer to that. It's, just the one of the mysteries of faith. I think he ends up sort of ascribing it to.
Thank you for that discussion. Well, while we're talking about this, I am reminded of two movies. One recent movie, one from years ago that you probably never heard of. One of them is called Being John Malkovich, and it was a convoluted tale of people that somehow were able to, I think, transport themselves into John Malkovich's mind. But John Malkovich was also in the movie, and he was playing himself in this movie, and these other people being him. Very, very strange movie, very entertaining. And then the more recent one, which was Nicolas Cage's movie, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Did you ever see that?
I did not see that, no.
Oh, you missed it. It's very good. So he plays himself, but
sorry, that's such a weird thing to say. Like, movies don't just air once and never are available for watching again. I did not miss the movie. I didn't see it in theaters, but I could still find the movie. It's not like permanently wiped from all existence once it's out of theaters.
Right now, you as of right now today, you missed out. Period.
Okay.
Right? You have missed out. You have the opportunity of redemption and seeing this excellent movie. But he plays a version of himself, which I think is kind of what Tolkien's talking about. If you put yourself into a character or a book, or like, what's that guy that wrote the Marvel movies.
Stan Lee.
Stan Lee's always does a cameo.
Mhm.
Hitchcock did the same thing in his movies, but not as himself. They always play cameos like the taxi driver or somebody missing a cab ride or something. But yeah, I see the point, and Tolkien's, of course, Tolkien's theory is that, you know, if a human does this, you dilute your character. You cannot adequately describe a fully functional person in a story. It's like a lesser version of it, because you'll never be able to translate somebody's existence into a story, except for that God did, because God is omnipotent and was able to do that. Am I any disagreements with that?
No, I agree, because he does say here on page 237, he says, Christ does not lay aside his divine nature in the incarnation. Instead, he assumes a human nature alongside the divine nature for the sake of saving humanity. So he's both at the same time. He's both, you know, the author and a character. He's both, you know, within and without, both human and divine, which, you know, is just the Catholic way of thought.
True. And so the author goes on to talk about how, in a similar type fashion, was it allegorical? Maybe, I don't know if I'm using it right. But wizards were spiritual beings, but they take on actual physical bodies, and then of course they're vulnerable because of that, because they can be killed because they've taken on a physical existence, similar to Jesus, I guess. So they're seeing some. You know, they're describing some parallels between these wizard characters in Tolkien's books and Jesus, which is God taking, you know, a spiritual being taking a physical form. And then, you know, of course, Jesus in his human nature experiences all of the limitations and loves appropriate to an embodied creature, but he's, you know, obviously more than that, but is able to experience those things much like wizards in the Tolkien stories.
Yes.
Any thought?
No, I mean, I think that's spot on. I also like the point that he makes that, you know, the wisdom of the wizards is also limited. You know, they don't have the full knowledge of God's plan. Of course, that's not paralleled with Christ, because, of course, you know, Jesus would have had that full knowledge because he is still God. At least I think so. You look quizzical. Do you think that he wouldn't have full knowledge?
Well, I don't know, because you know, he prays in the garden after the Last Supper, and he's, if I remember correctly, he's praying, you know, basically, you know, if God the Father's will is that he has to do this, he's going to do it, but he's kind of almost like, yeah, I'd really rather not.
Yeah, it's almost sort of like a middle point there, because he knows what's going to happen. He knows that it's going to end up in his death. So he does have like the foreknowledge of the plan, but he's still praying to God the Father to see if there's a way to do something different, if that makes sense. Like, if there's a way to deliver me from this, then let's do that. But if not, then I will willingly do it. So it's a weird sort of middle. So he does know the plan, but he thinks that there might be a way to change it. Maybe, I don't know. I think I'll have to like look more into that passage, because that's a good point.
Yeah, and maybe he's just like, really, crucifixion? Can we like, I don't know, can't they create the guillotine tomorrow or something? That's a lot quicker.
Yeah, could we not have waited a few hundred years? And
really, scourging? I mean, scourging? Why? I mean, that's kind of what I get from it. It's like, you know, but so yeah, it's that whole concept of, what is it, duality, or, you know, this kind of, they're separate beings but they're the same, and then what exactly is the Holy Spirit? You know, that whole discussion is just really kind of mind bending. So like, how do you be separate but the same, and how do you be omnipotent but have separate kind of identities?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's we digress.
Yes, that's a whole other discussion that would require, you know, many more books than just this one to talk about.
Yes, well, yeah, like hundreds of books have already been written about those, and nobody knows.
True, it's one of the mysteries of faith.
So let's talk about the Christ figures in Tolkien's fiction. Now that we've already put the disclaimer out there that there are none, at least according to Tolkien. Tolkien didn't intend for any of these to be Christ figures, but and he, as the author says immediately in this next section, Tolkien famously flouts allegorical reading of his fiction, and then talked about, you know, this radio interview that he had with Dennis Geralt, Denys. It's a weird spelling of a first name. I've never seen that before. And talking about he just never intended to be that. And when he wrote the Lord of the Rings, it was just writing the tale after the Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Hobbit left off, which seems logical to me.
Yeah, because the question that was posed was like, well, is Frodo, Christ, because, he suffered and then he came back and he, then sailed off to what is essentially heaven. And Tolkien's like, well, no. His response was, reading here is this, it seems more like an allegory of the human race rather than of Christ, always getting back up again, which is a good point.
Yeah, they struggle on almost blindly in a way, and insistent that he's not a stand-in, and Christ was not the only person to die in order to save something.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my point, is that some of the themes in his writings are universal themes.
Mm-hmm.
He just did it in a very creative and I'm sure in your opinion the best ever.
Yes, of course.
So that's, but anyway, so let me get back to it. So then there's the discussion of the threefold office of Christ: priest, prophet, and king. Frodo being the suffering priest, Gandalf being the wise prophet, and of course Sam being the king, right?
Aragorn being the king.
Yeah, Aragorn. Yes. I forgot about Aragorn. And the king, the returning king of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien has said that it was not consciously intended to have that tripartite Christ-like figure. The
Mm-hmm.
priest, the prophet, and the king. And then there's also a discussion of the redeemers such as Aslan. Am I supposed to know who that is?
Aslan is the lion in Narnia.
Oh, that's why I was like,
which is a much more explicit allegory there, because C.S. Lewis very much wanted this to be essentially a telling of the Bible there with Aslan and all of his Narnia works there.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I forgot about that because I was like, I don't remember an Aslan character in the Lord of the Rings.
Yes, no, in Narnia, very different series.
So there's a discussion of the Anglo-Saxon theology and how it may have influenced Tolkien and how he wrote these stories, and King Arthur being kind of a template for Christ's mercy and forgiveness, because King Arthur was had mercy upon the rebellious people within his land, was a kind king to a point. Any thoughts about that, or about the next thing was Tolkien's adaptation of the Volsung myth, which I don't even know anything about that. Maybe I do know it and I've forgotten it. Any thoughts about the King Arthur references to the Aragorn subject or character, and then this Volsung myth?
Yeah, so the Volsung one is more interesting, but to touch on the King Arthur one, there's been like Christ parallels between King Arthur for like forever, because the end of the King Arthur story is that he sails off and then he'll be prophesied to come once more to save England. Essentially, like, okay, well, that's very much a Christ-like figure. But Tolkien like specifically changed the Volsung myth, and this surrounds Sigurd. And it's this whole series, where he, slays a dragon and things like that, and he rescues women and stuff. It's Norse mythology, very interesting. But he says, he specifically changes his adaptation about the prophecy of Sigurd's fate to make him into an echo of Christ. He says, if in day of doom one deathless stands, who death hath tasted and dies no more, the serpent slayer, seed of Odin, then all shall not end, nor earth perish. etc., etc. The serpent shall shiver, insert waver, the wolf be vanquished, and the world rescued. So he kind of makes Sigurd in his own retelling of the story essentially the one who kills all of these, famous Norse myth monsters. The serpent, of course, being Jormungandr, the world serpent, Surt, the one who's prophesied to like destroy Asgard, and the wolf Fenris. So he's sort of combining a whole bunch of stuff and making sort of Sigurd into a Christ figure, which I think is very interesting, and I have not seen done anywhere else.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I thought you'd appreciate it.
No, that was good. Good discussion. All right. So then we move on to the specific discussion of Aragorn and his return. It's similar to the loss of the royal line in Israel, because there was a line, like the King David, and it seems like, I guess if I remember correctly, and of course I'm no expert on Jewish history, But there's a whole description of Jesus being a descendant of David, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but he's obviously not a prince. He's born in a stable,
Mm-hmm.
a manger with animals and stuff.
Yes,
And
that's what happens in a stable.
so it is a similar story to Aragorn,
Mm-hmm.
because Aragorn is this lost king. Everybody kind of thinks that the line is dead,
Mm-hmm.
but there's these stories about the return of the king, similar to restore stories about this Messiah that will, which is more of thought of to be more of a conquering king,
Mm-hmm.
militarily and politically, as opposed to Jesus' role of redemption and sin and all that kind of stuff. So what are your thoughts about that side of the story of Aragorn and parallels to Jesus's story?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's possible to look at it like that, as sort of Aragorn as the returning king. It's not 100% a good parallel, just specifically like in the facts of Aragorn's life, because he was orphaned and then he's like raised in Rivendell and stuff like that. So it's not 100% a direct comparison, but I do agree with the overall message of like this lost line and how's it going to return. Aragorn is of course a much more conquering king than Jesus was, actually reestablishing a kingdom and returning as a physical king, which was sort of the idea of a lot of the Jewish people that's what was going to happen with Jesus, and that's what was going to happen with the Messiah. We're going to like actually have our kingdom restored, but no, it was Jesus instead of this conquering king. So I think it works to an extent, that sort of look there, but then it sort of falls apart when you look at the pretty big differences between Aragorn and Jesus.
True. And but there are the other parallels they mention in the story is,
Mm-hmm.
when Aragorn revealed himself in his full majesty
Mm-hmm.
to Eomer. Is that the
Eomer.
Eomer? Is that the gal?
No,
Who
that
is
is the man. Eowyn is his cousin. Eomer is the dude from Rohan.
okay? The
Wait,
like
no, brother
no.
and sister. Sorry, I'm getting Theodred mixed up with Eomer. Yeah, brother and sister Eomer and Eowyn, and they are the niece and nephew of King Theoden.
Okay, so okay, very good. And there's a discussion of a flame flickering on his brow, when he reveals himself in that story. And then, Faramir was summoned back to the land of the living. I don't remember that. What is that part of the story where he heard the voice of the king and he's summoned back?
So that is I believe, in the Return of the King, after he's fighting in Minas Tirith, and or this is after he's attacked by the Nazgul in Osgiliath, and he's brought back to Minas Tirith, and he's sort of out of commission. I forget the term for it, but it's sort of like the breath of the Dementors in Harry Potter. I think that was very much borrowed from Tolkien there. But this sort of weight that's on you, and you fall like terribly sick, and you're unconscious and stuff. That's why he appears dead to Denethor, and he tries to burn him. And then eventually he's brought to the houses of healing, and Aragorn heals him. He hears the sound of the voice of his king, and he's brought back to life in that way.
I see. All right, and then there's I thought you'd be interested in this little reference to the word Thegen,
Mm-hmm.
which is the word used to translate disciple in the Anglo-Saxon
Mm-hmm.
Bible translations. And thus, this from the book, thus Jesus' commanding call to obedience is not to fearful servitude, but to the loyalty of a sword brother to his captain.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's the word, thane is how we have it in modern English, which is sort of, the sort of people beneath the king in a way, sort of lords, sort of, just people within his court that, serve the king, fight alongside him. And the Thegen, Thegen, as I'm assuming how you would pronounce that in the actual Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's definitely a different look at that. It's not just, serving sort of, we're so far beneath the king that we can't do anything about it. And, it's just his will does whatever. But no, we are happy to fight alongside him. We're like sort of his brothers in arms, which I think is a really good way to look at, the relationship between us and Christ.
Mm-hmm. And then to what you were talking about earlier, there's a longer description about how Aragorn had some sort of healing role when he was returning as the king to heal the people, and that really was not displayed in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, not too much.
There wasn't really any of that, except for like for specific, individual characters that he seemed to have some sort of the Elvic type magic to heal.
In the extended editions of The Lord of the Rings, you do have a scene in the Houses of Healing, but it's Aragorn healing Eowyn, and not necessarily Faramir, which I think he also does too there. But it's less of an emphasis placed on Faramir there, instead placed on Eowyn.
Right. And that was the gal who in the movie killed the Witch King.
Yes, and in the book.
And in the book.
Well, kill is a loose term, but yes, she defeated the Witch King.
What's the difference?
Because you couldn't really kill them necessarily. You sort of can vanquish their mortal form, but then as long as Sauron lives and as long as the ring remains, they still physically exist. But yes.
All right. So as the author reminds us that no single character directly represents Christ, which I think is part of what you're saying about Aragorn. He doesn't really fit. More of a warlike, temporal king. And then there's a discussion about Aragorn and Gandalf, and their certain sorrow and sternness, but also humor, laughing. And their joy is a hidden fountain that gushes forth like a spring from the depths. And we've talked before about, how I wonder about, Jesus' sense of humor. Don't you think he would be able to have some fun and joke around with people? But there's none of that really in the Bible.
Yeah, I like the GK.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like the G.K. Chesterton quote he has in here. There was some one thing that was too great for God to show us when he walked upon our earth. And I've sometimes fancied that it was his mirth. It's his happiness was just too much for us to bear, is what Chesterton is saying. That's why it's not in the Bible.
Yeah, you would think that if he was able to recruit 12 guys, just follow him, there'd have to have been some sort of positive draw rather than just, I'm God and follow me. Do you think?
Yeah, no, I think he would have been a funny guy.
Or at least enjoyable to be around.
Yes, I would imagine.
Perhaps gregarious at times.
Maybe Jesus was gregarious. There we go.
I would think he would be gregarious, but also judgmental, because people nowadays think that Jesus was not judgmental, but I think he was. I think he was just firm. Was like, no, you've had 5 husbands, pointing out the problems, not just forgiving everybody for everything they did without them asking for it and acknowledging the sin. Anywho, moving along. So where do I want to go from this? Oh, there's a discussion of the tree, where Gandalf leads Aragorn to a sapling from the big white tree, and that's the white tree at Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith. And the author makes a reference to Adam and the tree of life and tree of knowledge, whatever it was, that where Eve tricked him into eating it and then condemned us all to sin. Just joking, of course. But about that part. So anyway, what are your thoughts about that and Aragorn being, a part of a larger story, not, being some ways, a Christ-like figure, but other ways not.
I think it's very true. And especially when you consider, so Nimloth is the name of the tree. And, Gandalf says it's a descendant of the eldest of trees, which is a reference to the 2 trees of light that were like the source of light for the entire world. And then eventually the Silmarils were made from the light of those 2 trees. So it's like even more of an idea that this is really important. It's not just some, ornamental tree that, we've passed down and have had like acorns. No, it's like the tree from, the trees. And I think that's definitely true. It's, look at Christ, Christ is not just a man descended from, a line of great kings like David. He is a man descended from the man, Adam originally. And, he is Adam returned. And I think in a lot of the ways, I think that sort of connection really works because, it's not just any old guy who's coming and who's saving these people, but no, this is, God, this is the Adam sort of reborn.
Interesting.
Yes.
Speaking of being reborn, segue, the next section is discussing the resurrection. Of course, Gandalf is the resurrection figure that everybody talks about because he fights the Balrog and goes into the depths.
Yes.
And then is resurrected and seems to be confused by his own name later, which we've kind of talked about in a previous episode about, these kind of spirit figures when they take human form that they seem to have a vague recollection, but don't really have knowledge of that spirit world fully. Right. But, and then But Tolkien specifically says he does not intend Gandalf to represent Jesus in the resurrection at all.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we discuss it as if it's true. What are your thoughts about that? Him returning beyond all hope, and they can't really recognize him, just like the apostles couldn't recognize Jesus when he first comes back. Which I always wonder about that. Although sometimes when I see people at the store, and it's like a face out of context, like if I know them from work and then I see them at Walmart, it takes me a second. Oh, wait a second. Oh yeah, I know you. And how do I know you? What's your name? I don't know if you ever experience it. I experience it all the time. I'm terrible with names anyway. But I have a dual affliction. I'm terrible with names and faces.
that is a problem.
So sometimes I'm meeting somebody again, and I have no idea who they were. I have no memory of their face or their name, but they know me. They know things about me. But I'm like, I don't know. Then it comes to me later. But similar to the resurrection story. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the cases where, of course, Gandalf isn't meant to be an allegory of Jesus. I don't want to claim that, but we can look at, sort of Tolkien's understanding of Jesus in the resurrection through Gandalf. I think this is definitely a place where, everything you just mentioned with how many similarities there are between the story of Gandalf and the story of Jesus. Like, even if Tolkien wasn't intending it, like, he's definitely drawing on his, Christian knowledge here. This is sort of, apparent in his writings, even if it wasn't, intentional. Like, I'm going to write about Jesus, blah, 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 blah. But it's definitely, I think, it's definitely influenced his story of sort of Gandalf's resurrection here.
How would you write this story of resurrection without drawing parallels to Jesus?
I think it would be impossible.
Yeah. So, I mean, isn't that really the case? I guess, he went off and he kind of, if you have a spirit world figure that kind of goes off and battles an evil demon for some period of time, but you want to have have him presumed to be dead and then come back. Every time you have a character that's presumed to be dead and comes back, which is a common theme in a lot of movies, right? Especially like war movies, somebody goes off and we lost that guy, and then he comes back in and saves him at the end. It's like an 80s movie typical thing to happen, where one of the characters comes back and then it's really typical, like a war movie. That person's presumed to be dead, comes back at the last minute and saves the real hero of the movie, sacrificing himself in a very Christ-like fashion to redeem everybody. Or like the person who makes a terrible like is a turncoat, and then they think he's dead, but he comes back, and that's a common theme in movies.
Yes,
anyway,
that is a common thing.
So that I'm just kind of making a half sarcastic point that I agree with you, but I also think it's a little unfair, because I don't think that's really what he's doing. He just has a character that is gone off to battle, presumed dead, and comes back.
Sure.
But a little bit more because he seems to not even know who he is. They don't really recognize him at first, which is very, very much similar, except for Jesus knew who he was.
Yes. But I mean, again, you also have the parallel of, this is sort of a divine figure, Gandalf, in this case, an angel who is physically sort of incarnate in the world. So I think that the parallel does stick a little bit more than other stories.
True. All right. I concede. All right. Salvation. And again, this word that this author really loves, eucatastrophic.
Eucatastrophic.
Catastrophic.
Yes, eucatastrophe.
Soteriology.
Soteriology.
Soteriology. So why don't you discuss this, because I don't know what the hell we're talking about here. Revelation, that there has to be this great catastrophe of Jesus, his crucifixion and resurrection, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what the salvation and his Tolkien stories. What are your thoughts about this whole subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of his main points here is that, this is something that happens again and again in every story, in every culture that we see. There's always some big sacrifice, some horrible event that has to happen in order for the world, like, eventually to be redeemed and for everything to be saved. He says, that's exactly what we see here. And that's really Tolkien's main point with the word eucatastrophe, the word that Tolkien made up and I really like, sort of the good catastrophe, the terrible thing that has to happen for the good of the world. And that's exactly what we see with Christ's salvation. He has to die in order for the world to be redeemed. God literally has to die on a cross in order for everything to succeed. So it's just generally this idea of, how do we, how does this have to happen? He brings this into like storytelling. We are made. What he says here, this is why our nature finds such a resonance with the sudden joyous turn, because we are made for it. As storytellers, we are redeemed in accord with our nature by a moving story. But the author of this story is also the author of reality, and so this story is not only true, but real. So it's sort of tying everything back into, we as storytellers are essentially trying to imitate the story of God no matter where we go. That's why this sort of idea always resonates with us. And that's exactly what you're saying. You see this in all the 80s movies in which, the character dies and comes back. Tolkien says that the reason for this is we're trying to tell the story of reality itself. We're trying, even subconsciously, always to tell the story of God. And, just we as storytellers made in the image and likeness of God.
I'm impressed that you were able to put all that together in an effective way. And that was very good.
Thank you. I appreciate
it. All right. So then we're talking about salvation, hints of salvation in Middle Earth. And again, a disclaimer. There can be Tolkien sets his stories in a mythical version of our own history prior to the advent of Christ. There can be no direct analogy to Christian salvation in his fiction, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And there's a discussion about Finrod sees agents of men. Sees men as agents of unmarring the world, because they're gonna, the original story which talked about where the music gets, perverted or whatever, and then men are in the world. And then there's a discussion of Arwen and Frodo's self-denial and suffering. Of course, I know about Frodo's self-denial and suffering. Arwen, is she the girlfriend of Aragorn?
Yeah, she's the elf who loves Aragorn. In order to, actually marry him and to live with him, she has to like give up her elvish grace essentially and live as a human and eventually die.
So that's what they're talking about.
Yes.
There. Because she doesn't actually suffer a lot. She gives that up. So it's not like she's, being tortured.
Yes.
She's saying, well, I'm making this choice to live in happiness with my beloved until die a natural death, and that's some sort of sacrifice, I guess.
It's not necessarily just that. It's also the idea that the elves are the people who get to go over and like exist in the heaven on earth in Valinor, go over to the west. Yeah. And in living with Aragorn, she completely gives that up. So she does not get to go into the west. She does not get to go to Valinor, and she has to sort of deal with the mystery of what happens to men after death, because that's like a big thing for the elves, is like nobody knows what happens to the men. Right. It's just a complete mystery. So she's giving up essentially eternal life in heaven for I don't know, who knows what happens after that.
Right. Okay.
In Tolkien's world.
Yeah, there's a then there's a reference to a kind of what was I going to say? That there's like a direction in history, the salvation, and that Satan cannot crush the lineage out of which God will rise or raise. And that's, basically that Jesus was from this, family path, I guess you'd say, or ancestry and all that kind of stuff. And I'm reminded of the movie, The Terminator, and the series of Terminators movies. And you're looking at me puzzled, but it's I think it's now when I got to think about it, it's a very similar type of theory that Satan cannot, no matter what Satan does, that the main hero, Sarah Connor's, what's Connor's, the first name of her son? I'm drawing a blank.
I do not know.
Sarah, do you know the Terminator movie? You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen the first one, and that's it.
Oh my gosh! Well, the rest of them aren't as good. Well, Terminator 2 is pretty good, but Sarah. So the whole movie is, some spoilers, is that Sarah Connor is going to have a son who leads the human revolution against the AI overlords who decide to exterminate the humans, and they send and anyway they send the Terminator back in time to kill Sarah Connor because so she cannot give birth. It's actually a pro-life movie, to give birth to her son, John Connor, I think. And then so John sends his best buddy back to try to fight off the Terminator, and then purportedly destroys the time machine so nobody else can go back. But of course, we have sequels for various reasons, mostly money. But in any event, and of course, his buddy is really his father. That's a spoiler. which we find out in the movie. Anyway, so and then there's a series of other Terminators that come back after that because they're really other time machines, blah 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 blah. Anyway, my point is, in those stories, ultimately, it's kind of like Frodo is chosen to carry the ring. We'll get to this in a second about fate and a chosen person. But similarly, like John Connor is the one that is to lead this fight, the successful fight against these evil creations, which are, I think Tolkien would like that story in the sense that he believes that mechanized individuals or a mechanized world is an evil world, and is not truly creative. Anyway, no matter what they do, it all turns out that two things. One, it's almost like the nuclear exchange is fated to happen, which is what the AI, what's it called, Skynet, unleashes to try to eradicate as many humans as possible. And then secondly, they can't stop John Connor. I mean, so this is kind of a similar story that, even if Frodo was thwarted. Frodo did not put the ring into the fire of Mount Doom?
Yes,
Mount Doom. But then Gollum fulfilled the role and the mission by stealing the ring from him and all that kind of stuff, and causing inadvertently the destruction of the ring. I think that there's a lot of similarities.
I would agree.
That type of story arc, where it's like, there's a lot of people have to make a lot of choices into either accept the mission or not. But the theme in both stories is that the outcome's probably going to be the same because God wills it. But Terminator is not a religious movie at all.
Yeah,
it really should have had some religious elements. That would have made it perfect, but there's none. Because if the world is going to end, Sarah Connor, prior to Terminator 2, is like she's studying on military tactics and improving her physical health because she knows this event is coming and she has to raise the son at that point. And she has a son, but for various reasons she's in a sanitarium because they think she's crazy. But there's no religious angle, and I would think that you'd be trying to find God too. I'm for preparation, but you'd think you'd be saying some prayers, but there's none of that. Anyway, back to our story. Do you have any thoughts in after my long sidebar there?
Yes, there's a long sort of tangent there, but no, I agree. And you get this a lot with time travel stories of, what was always going to happen because of this. But I think it's essentially that is the eucatastrophe is what you're talking about.
Right.
If the Terminator, hadn't gone back in time to kill Sarah Connors, the dad or the friend of the son, who is actually the dad, would never have gone back in the first place. And therefore, John Connor never would have been born either. So it's only because the bad thing happened of the Terminator going back to try and kill her that her son was born anyway, because they had to send the guy back. And so It's like, have to have the evil thing in order for the salvation to come. I think that's the exact idea of eucatastrophe that Tolkien's talking about. Weird, time travel, mechanics there, of course. But, I think it is that general concept.
Yeah. And there's also a theory of linear time. So even if you're able to go back in time, that event has already occurred. By the time you decide to go back in time, you've already been back in time.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yes, I think sure that is the linear theory of time. Good job.
All right, shall we move on to theories of atonement?
Yes,
Legendarium, and there's a mention of Anselm's theory, satisfaction theory, and then a substitutionary theory. And but it mentions Tolkien rarely speaks of salvation as forgiveness at all. He seems to think more so as the Christ story is just Christ being victorious over the devil and evil. And then I do see that as a parallel in his writings, that it's just a straight out victory. It's a fight, a spiritual fight, but then it's a straight out victory against evil and Satan. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an idea. This is the Christus Victor idea, that Christ's victory over the devil. And this is something that you don't see like anywhere anymore. That was like the big, really sort of Middle Ages type idea. The medieval times, really first 1,000 years of the church is what he says. You don't see that anywhere anymore, but I think it is still definitely an important element in the story of Christ, in that Christ literally did just conquer the devil. And we don't really see that too much anymore, at least not in, churches that I've been to. But I think it is an important thing to remember. Yes, you do have the salvation. Yes, you have the forgiveness, and yes, you have the atonement of sin. But you also have, Christ as, this victorious king, kind of going back again to that earlier idea of him, literally becoming a physical king of a kingdom, waging war against the devil and sort of redeeming humanity in that way. And that's sort of an idea that I'd almost like to see more, become more prevalent in the modern church today.
Yeah, and I've always had some sort of, I don't know, it's emotional reaction to the whole theory of Christ, the sacrificial act, and that he's taken on the burden of all our sins, and by allowing himself to be crucified, he has taken on that burden of atonement, I guess, or of punishment on behalf of us for our sins. And something about that just doesn't resonate with me. As part of like the covenant and this and that, and God, and the parallels back to Abraham. Of course, I don't like the Abraham and the almost killing of his son story anyway, for various reasons. But I like this victory story better,
Yeah.
And it was like, for the early church, that's what it was, right? It was, and you could see how in the Acts of the Apostles, of course, are fearful at first, but then once they decide to own it and just say, okay, yeah, this is what happened. That's really what their preaching was. It seemed like, and they're very much, articulating that he, won over sin and Satan and the forces of evil, in his own way by being reincarnated, and he came back from hell.
Yeah.
He didn't die and go into heaven in some paradise. He went down to hell and liberated some people,
And we talk about that in a little bit. There's a whole nother section on the harrowing of hell here, which is
next section. We can,
yes.
Why don't we talk about both of those? And I don't know if you want to talk about the specific examples of, Gandalf and that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts?
I think this is definitely a very clear thing here. He makes a comparison. There's an early draft when Frodo returns to the Shire. You have this warlord over the Shire, and this is at the point where it's not really Saruman yet, but it's still some other guy. And he says, he reenacts the battle of Fingon and Morgoth from the Silmarillion. Not even half the size of the brutish man, Frodo draws Sting and casts his cloak aside. Suddenly he's shown a small gallant figure clad in mithril like an elf prince. And so that's a reference to the Silmarillion, where this one elf goes, okay, I'm going to challenge Morgoth. I'm sick of this guy. He's killed all my friends. He's killed all my family. And he goes up to the gate of his castle, and he, surprisingly, does a pretty decent job against, the master of all evil in the universe. He actually ends up wounding him, and Morgoth, walks with a limp throughout the rest of his life. So he doesn't end up killing Morgoth, but it's this idea of, we do need these people to go and literally face the evil. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He's, in hell, he's facing, Satan himself, and he wins. He's victorious, which I think is a really compelling idea.
Yeah. And I like I don't know that I've ever heard that story before about the one angel taking on Morgoth. And then I guess, was that one angel? One elf. Yeah. Sorry. What happened to that elf?
He died. He got taken into the walls and was never seen again, but he did end up wounding, I think he stabbed Morgoth in the heel, essentially. And yeah.
I like that story because I would much rather prefer to die a violent death and providing a daily reminder to the person that killed me for the rest of their life that I at least wounded them before. If I was going to die anyway, I guess is what I'm saying. I'd rather die on my feet and permanently wound, my tormentor, rather than die, as a subject.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that resonates with me. And there's, they're talking about, the whole story. Isn't this where they have the story about the debate about going into the gates of Sauron's Black Castle, or the heck it's called, Black Gates, isn't it?
Black Gates of Mordor, yes, the Black
Gates of Mordor, and I love that part of the story where the entire strategy of destruction of the ring, and then secondarily going to the Black Gates to distract Sauron from the couple hobbits going to be destroying the ring in Mount Doom
Mm-hmm.
would never even be conceived of by Sauron, because it would not be anything that would ever come to the mind of an evil, power-hungry person that you would ever try to win the battle by just destroying the ring and not using it. The whole idea behind the ring and how destructive it is to individuals is that it can convert you to its cause, and it's just kind of, I'd like that whole storyline that evil sometimes can't even conceive of the one thing that could destroy it, because it's too evil to realize that innocence and goodness actually exist in the world.
Yeah. I wonder if there's sort of an element of that too, like in, Satan himself. This is just complete speculation. This isn't based off of any like actual church teaching or anything. But I wonder if it is the case that, Satan would never have expected Jesus to die and go into hell. Just like, the Jews were expecting, a triumphant king to, lead them back, to their promised land and stuff like that, a physical king. I wonder if it also would have surprised Satan that God, sent his only son to die. And it would have been a shock to Satan as well, because he would have expected, as Satan, I think he did tempt Jesus with all of these things. He would have expected Jesus to claim a kingdom and to claim all the power on earth and face him in that regard, and not to actually, face him in hell and to die and to go down into the harrowing of hell.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And if you look at like Old Testament God, like the Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction of an entire city, and the very punitive nature of God's judgment in the Old Testament versus the completely different, not completely different, but a much different story and redemption arc in the New Testament than the Old Testament. And yeah, I think Satan would have been like, what? He let them do what to him? I'm offering him all this stuff, and he's gonna let them scourge, his son, and then he comes down here, or over here, wherever it's located. I think you're right. I mean, I never really considered it from Satan's perspective. He would have like, oh my God. Yeah, he would have literally said, oh my God. Anyway, so yeah, that's a good point. So do we want to discuss about that any more? There is the I think the section where they reference Aragorn going into the damned the people of the dead, and kind of pulling them out of, this is the harrowing of hell, so it's a type of story that Jesus brought out, presumably those people that had died and gone to hell before of course he was alive to redeem them and all that stuff. And then so Aragorn, similar thing to the cursed men who were not loyal to their oaths, and then of course they came and started killing all these orcs and stuff. Thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we covered a lot of the harrowing of hell, as we already did, but no, I do like that sort of representation there with Aragorn, actually going into the kingdom of the dead in a very similar way to Christ, and then leading the army out. No, I like the comparison there, but I think we've talked pretty much at length about the harrowing of hell here now.
I like the story of those condemned spirits coming out and killing a whole bunch of orcs. Salvation and election, the election story, where there seem to be people that are kind of preordained or destined to do things, but it's an interesting concept that like the story, the ring would have been destroyed one way or the other. I mean, that was God's story, but still people had free will. They could either be successful, like Frodo could be successful, or not. He could have chosen, he was chosen to be the ring bearer, but it was still his choice to accept it. So that's kind of an interesting storyline. And then I guess what would have happened? We don't know what would have happened. I guess somebody else would have stepped up. Would have been Sam or Pippin or Merry. Then what would have happened?
Yeah,
who knows? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I don't think Tolkien believed in the predestination of anybody, and we might get into that a little bit here. I'm trying to remember if he mentions that at all. But yeah, it is this idea of you do have a destined plan for you, but you can reject it at any time. You can just go ahead and do your own thing. You could reject, the fate that God has planned for you and stuff like that. So it's this idea of, how exactly is it reconciled? Is God's plan changing all the time, or is God's plan constant, and like just all the parts are changing all the time because of people rejecting the plan? It's how does it all physically work? I mean, of course, we'll never fully grasp it because it's the lives of 8 billion people now on the planet, and each one, if they have their own destined path, how many of them are rejecting that path, how many of them are following it, who takes up their path if they don't choose to do it. It's an interesting idea of how do you reconcile all of that?
I don't know. And the book specifically says that Tolkien's no Calvinist, when Calvinists are somewhat fatalistic, or they believe there are certain chosen people.
Yes, it's you are either going to heaven or you're going to hell, and that is destined from the date of your birth.
Preordained, I guess.
Yes.
Interesting concept, and also depressing, I would think.
Yes.
And I guess you're just trying to play the odds.
Yeah.
How do you know? Anyway, I guess I have to find a Calvinist and ask him.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Calvinism. I know some Calvinists, but I can't really.
Who do you know that's a Calvinist?
A lot of Protestants are, like a lot of different, like Baptists and I don't know specific denominations and stuff. Baptists, Presbyterians, maybe. I think the Methodists are as well. I could be wrong about all of those, but no, there's a lot of people who are Calvinists just by nature of the church that they go to.
You have talked to people who believe in the Calvinist theory of the elect.
Yes.
Huh.
Very often, surprisingly.
Yeah, it is surprising to me. I would almost be compelled to try to tempt them to do evil things.
What? What?
Well, presumably they believe that they are the elect, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because if you believe in the elect, we're going off on a tangent. If you believe in that there are some people that are the elect, you always believe that you're one of them.
Mm-hmm.
You never believe that there are some people chosen for heaven and some people chosen for hell, and you're one chosen for hell, right?
Yes.
And one of them thinks that they're one of the chosen ones for heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would almost be, I'm saying almost, it would be almost irresistible to try to tempt them to go down the path of evil because they believe that they're preordained to be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you can prove them wrong.
I guess so. I don't think I would find that as fun as you would find it.
Well, I would at least ask the person, well, you believe in the predestination. Well, you one of the elect?
Mm-hmm.
They would say yes. Well, who ask them, well, who believes in this that is not one of the elect? Because of course you're going to believe you're one of the elect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it has no meaning. You can't believe in predestination and some go to heaven and some go to hell, and then think that you and all your family and your buddies are going to heaven.
Yeah.
And I do have a problem, and I have a problem with people saying, and I have never articulated this because it's wrong to articulate it, but no. I hate when people say, well, I know they're in a better place now after they die.
Mm-hmm. We
do not know that. And so and my hope and expectation is I will die before you, not looking to die anytime soon. But as your father, I don't want, I want you to have a much longer life than me.
Mm-hmm.
And but I don't want, of course, I don't know where I will be, but I really will be unhappy wherever I am if you say, oh, I know he's in heaven. You don't know that. Oh, we know he's in a better place. If anybody says that at my funeral, fire and brimstone. Some lightning strikes.
That's great, Dad. Thank you.
And they may be coming from underneath. They may be coming up from up above. Somebody's going to be struck with some electrical volts. Anyways, let's moving right along. Let's talk about faith. We all have faith.
Yes.
Faith. And Tolkien writes that faith is an act of will inspired by love.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good description.
I think so too. Yes.
And there's really a discussion of like allegiance to people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's of course another reference to, I think it's another reference to the fall of Arthur, isn't that? Yeah, the fall of Arthur, where his wife cheats with what's his face?
Mordred.
And that's a really sad story.
Yes, it is.
Um,
Or she cheats on him with Lancelot, and he has the son Mordred. Yes.
okay. Yes, that's right.
Mordred is an incestuous son, I think,
Right.
because King Arthur ends up accidentally like marrying his sister at one point, I believe.
Well, I'm trying to think of the original King Arthur because I always get confused with the movie Excalibur.
I see.
Just an excellent movie.
I've
And
never seen it.
oh, dude, you've never seen that movie?
I've never seen it.
It introduced me to Carl Orff from
Hmm.
Piranha.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's a battle scene. It's very good movie making with Carl. I've never heard of Carl Orff and Carmina Burana before that, and righteous. Anyway, so you should watch the movie. That's another. We gotta make a list of all
We
these
do.
movies.
We've said so many on the podcast.
3 today, and all very excellent movies, which I would watch again. All right. So what were you talking about? We're talking about faith and being and the fortune, like Samwise, whatever his name. I always want to say Banshee.
GMG.
Yeah. Kind of trusting in luck, and there's references to fortune and God's plan. Any thoughts you want to go down a path with regard to faith and expectations and allegiances?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting idea he brings up. I'm not really quite sure what to make of it because his idea is essentially that like with pre-Christian peoples who don't know about Jesus and don't really have an understanding of God, then it's sort of acceptable like for them to just have faith in like the workings of the world. Like that's essentially what he's saying with Sam and Frodo as they're marching. They attribute a lot of their stuff to luck or to fortune, and like thanks be to this good luck that we have that all the orcs have moved away. Where it's the Christian people would recognize that as it's a good thing I have faith in God. God has paved this way for me. He's saying, if you don't know about God and you don't know about Christ, then it's sort of okay for you to just rely on, this general idea of there is a plan for me. He says, kind of like people from all over the world have this sort of idea, regardless if they have like a structured religion, in that, there is some sort of working of the world. I think is sort of the idea that he's getting at, he's equating that to sort of God working through those people. If you believe in this sort of plan, then that is morally acceptable, which is interesting. I'm not quite sure what to make of
it. Do you think that when good things happen to you, do you think it's God's providence or God helping you out or being involved?
I don't think every good thing. I think a lot of very big good things. I think it's possible that God had influence in those.
Well, do you think? Like, have you experienced that and thought, I prayed for that or this good. I don't want an example, but I just was wondering if you had any that you thought, this thing could only have happened because of some intervention, because this has got to be part of God's plan. Ever have that thought?
I think so. Yes.
I have the exact opposite thought. I think that every bad thing that happens to me, I mean, I think that's part of God's plan, and it's a challenge to overcome. I think that every really good thing that kind of drops in my lap is just like a temptation from Satan to take everything for granted.
Interesting.
I feel like I have a very negative personality.
You do. You definitely do. But I do see where you're coming from. It's sort of that idea of like if you pray for
it's corrupting. Like things that go really well, it can corrupt your soul.
But it's also sort of that idea of like if you pray for patience, then God will give you a situation in which you have to be patient. Right. It's sort of that sort of idea. I think that's sort of what you're looking at, right? If like the negative things that happen to you, that's sort of part of God's plan. Like if you're really praying, I need to be, more courageous. I need to, step out of my boundaries a little bit more. Then all of a sudden you're faced with, challenge after challenge after challenge where you really have to like step out of the way. Then I think that is also God doing that for you because you prayed for courage, you prayed for patience, you prayed for, whatever. And God is now saying, okay, you want patience? Have some patience, here you go. Here's the situation and now deal with it. And I think that's possible too.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And I also would support my theory that God has a sense of humor.
I would say so.
Oh yeah. You want some patience? Let's see how patience works out for you. Wait for this. Here's a delayed flight for 3 days. Patience. Here's a hurricane.
I mean, I think it's
Good luck
possible.
coming back. Good luck getting back from the Caribbean. Off-season hurricane. All right. Any other thoughts on that topic or on this chapter altogether?
I mean, I really enjoyed this chapter. I think this was a good episode, but believe it or not, I always enjoy the chapters. I hope that you got more out of this than you were thinking at the beginning, because at the beginning you were very cynical, and I hope you've come around a little bit more to seeing these allegories, or these, not necessarily allegories, but these, sort of images of Christ in Tolkien's writings.
There are parallels.
Yes.
And I think that's worth talking about parallels, but I wanted to have a disclaimer that they are not intended to be those.
Yes, no, and I appreciate the disclaimer, because that's what Tolkien always rallied against, is he had people coming up to him all the time. He's like, oh, well, Saruman is the Nazis, Saruman is Germany, and the Allies are the West. And no, never, absolutely not.
Yes.
Yes,
I have no other.
I was about to ask you the same thing, but apparently not. Apparently you don't have any other thoughts.
I got nothing left.
You have no more tangents, no more rants.
Well, don't tempt me.
I bet you explained the full plot of Terminator 2 in detail. We've gone through the full plot of Terminator 1.
No.
That was not a serious request. Please don't.
I was going to, but both of those movies are very very well done, and they bring up a lot of issues with regard to, of course, like time travel, but also morality and what is acceptable to do to head off a greater tragedy.
Yeah. So that's our movie recommendation for this week. Watch the Terminator series, I guess. Yeah,
you've never seen Terminator 2?
I don't think so. I'm not even sure if I've seen the full Terminator 1.
Oh, that's a great movie. Yeah, Terminator 2 is very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of good chase scenes, and so that's 4 movies that you need to see.
Yes,
because it was Being John Malkovich, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, Terminator 2. What was the other one? There's another one.
And Excalibur.
Yes, those are all excellent movies.
I'll keep that in mind next time I come home in August, I guess.
They have a movie marathon.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Do you have any other closing remarks?
No.
Well, you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. That's ULMTD Opinions to get updates on when episodes are live. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
And this has been Season 5, Episode 10 of Unlimited Opinions.